I found out just how fast fake authority falls apart the morning my neighbor called the cops on me for parking my own truck in front of my own property. And the wild part is, she still thought she was the one in charge when the officer showed up. She stood there on my walkway in pressed khakis, holding a violation notice like it was a badge, talking to me like I was some random renter who didn't know the rules. And when I told her real calm, I'm not in your HOA, she actually laughed in my face. You ever meet somebody so deep in their own little kingdom that reality feels optional to them? Yeah, that was Constance Whitmore. By the time the patrol car rolled up, she was already listing my offenses. Refusal to comply, disruption of the neighborhood creating tension in the community. All that polished nonsense people use when they want to sound official without actually being right. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't argue. I just stood there and let her talk, because sometimes the most satisfying thing in the world is knowing somebody's about to humiliate themselves in public, and there is absolutely nothing you need to do except wait. My name's Garrett Wills. I grew up about 40 miles south of Kettlebrook, Ohio, in one of those towns where everybody knows what truck you drive and what your dad did for a living before they know your middle name. My dad was a pipe fitter. My mom worked dispatch for the sheriff's office. Between the two of them, I learned two things early: always read what you sign and never assume the loudest person in the room knows the most. I spent most of my 20s doing HVAC work, sweating through attics in July, crawling under houses in February, breathing in insulation dust, old grease, 20 years of somebody else's cigarette smoke baked into ductwork. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. I saved. I stayed cheap. I bought one little rental property, then another, nothing flashy. No seminars, no motivational speeches, no social media nonsense, just work numbers, patience. Eventually, I started buying houses on one street in Kettlebrook Ridge Rest Lane. Old single-family homes, a little tired, mostly ignored the kind of places that scared off people looking for easy money. My contractor, Dwayne Brackett, and I renovated them one by one. Roofs, plumbing, electrical, flooring, furnaces, all of it. We made them solid, good homes, good tenants. The kind of street you could be proud of without bragging about it. And here's the part Constance never bothered to learn before she declared war on me. By that spring, I owned 14 of the 17 houses on Ridge Rest Lane. Not some of them, 14. Including hers, no. But close enough to make her whole little empire a joke once the math came out. Constance had been on that street about 9 years. Somewhere in that time, she'd founded the Ridge Rest Meadows HOA, drafted up a set of covenants that read like a middle school hall monitor, discovered legal formatting, and crowned herself president through a community vote involving a handful of people, most of whom were either related to her or too tired to fight. She loved rules the way some people love church, loved the performance of order, loved the clipboard, loved being the person who could tell somebody else no. This whole thing started over a boat. One of my tenants, Phyllis Odom, a retired 6th grade teacher with a spine made of steel and exactly zero tolerance for nonsense, had an old fishing boat parked on a gravel pad beside her house, covered off the road on private property. Hadn't moved in 2 years. It had belonged to her late husband, and she wasn't ready to let it go yet. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Constance slid a violation notice under her door claiming the boat violated HOA rules and would trigger a $50 a day fine if it wasn't removed. Phyllis called me, voice trembling in that way people do when they're trying very hard not to cry in front of a stranger. I drove over, stood in her living room, while the smell of cinnamon oatmeal drifted in from the kitchen, and read the paper top to bottom. That's when I got that cold feeling in my chest, the one I get when somebody is confused I want to control this with I'm legally allowed to. Because 412 Ridge Rest Phyllis's place was mine. And it was not, had never been, and was never going to be part of Constance's HOA. I called her. Politely. Told her the parcel wasn't bound by her covenants. Told her I had the county records in front of me. She gave me that tight little laugh people use when facts are being rude to them. Said it must be a clerical mistake. I told her intent doesn't bind property in Ohio, recorded documents do. Then I wished her a good afternoon and hung up, feeling maybe a little too pleased with myself. That was my mistake. See, some people hear you're wrong and back off. Constance heard it like a dare. 4 days later, she showed up at 7 a.m. in a white sedan with a magnetic HOA logo slapped on the door, and I swear to you, I am not making that up. Took photos of Phyllis's boat from 3 angles and left a second notice. This one was longer, louder, and full of legal terms she'd clearly found online around midnight and stapled together like a craft project. Then she started knocking on doors. My doors. talking to my tenants, standing on porches delivering speeches about standards and community values while oatmeal got cold and dogs barked behind screen doors. That was when I stopped trying to be neighborly. I caught her one afternoon outside another one of my houses, standing by the mailbox with that clipboard tucked under her arm like she worked for God. Gravel cracked under my boots when I got out of the truck. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and dryer sheets from a vent down the block. "Constance," I said, "we need to clear something up." She turned, gave me that polished expression people practice when they think they're authority. I unfolded a county parcel map right there on the hood of my truck and pointed to house after house after house. "This one's mine, that one's mine, that one too. 14 of them, none of them are in your HOA. She didn't even take the paper. Just stared at it like I'd handed her a medical diagnosis. "You have 3 houses left," I told her. 3. Stop contacting my tenants. You'd think that would have ended it. You'd think a normal person would go home, recheck the paperwork, maybe sit quietly, with the horrifying realization that they'd been policing the wrong man for years. Constance was not a normal person. Instead, she escalated. She filed code complaints. She sent newsletters warning the neighborhood about outside investor interests changing the character of the street. She hired a lawyer, not a good one, but technically a lawyer, who sent me a letter arguing my properties were subject to implied covenant obligations, which is real legal language used in very specific situations and absolutely did not apply to me. My attorney, Shelby Rohr, answered him with 3 paragraphs and enough footnotes to ruin his week. Then came the twist, and this is where the whole story shifted. I started digging through county records late one night, coffee going cold beside me, fan humming in the background, just reading deed histories and parcel filings the way some people watch crime documentaries. And I found a crack in Constance's little kingdom. Her HOA hadn't even been properly recorded against all the houses she claimed it governed. Not mine, those were never in it. I mean hers. 3 of the 11 so-called HOA homes didn't have the covenants attached to their titles at all. Clean title histories, no recorded encumbrance, no lawful HOA bind. Which meant for years Constance had been collecting dues, issuing violations, and pushing rules on people who were never legally members in the first place. That changed everything. One of those homeowners, Clifton Bars, had paid hundreds in dues. Another family, the Spencers, had torn down a shed because they'd been told it violated HOA rules. Rules that did not legally apply to them. When they found out, they were furious, and they had every right to be. Shelby drafted demand letters, refunds, damages, fees. Suddenly, Constance wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the one with exposure. And still she kept going. She held a neighborhood meeting in a gazebo at the east end of the street, talking about protecting the community from speculative rentals, except that gazebo sat on one of my vacant lots. My land. She'd been using it for years like it was common property because nobody had bothered to challenge her. So I did something quiet. No speeches, no threats. I had the lot surveyed, then put up a split-rail fence around it. Clean cedar neat lines, gate left unlocked. Totally lawful, totally visible. I said nothing. I just waited. Sure enough, she lost her mind. She left me a 7-minute voicemail about intimidation and community obstruction, then called the police claiming I was blocking a common easement. That's the morning the officer showed up. Young guy, calm, careful, asked for documentation. I showed him the deed on my phone, showed him the lot map. He asked Constance if she had proof of any easement. She said there was an implied community understanding. You should have seen his face. He looked at the open gate, looked at the fence, looked back at her and told her as gently as a man can tell somebody they're embarrassing themselves that this was a civil matter and no law had been broken. That should have been the moment she stopped. Instead, she called again the next day. But by then the paper trail was too big, too clean, too ugly for her. Public complaints, false claims, bad filings, dues collected from non-members, a rezoning petition to the city based on inflated numbers, even a complaint to the Ohio Real Estate Commission claiming I was an unlicensed property manager, even though owners managing their own properties are explicitly exempt. Every move she made created another record, and every record told the same story. She was using process as a weapon because she couldn't win on the facts. The city council meeting was where it all came apart. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, old municipal carpet, that faint smell. Every government building has coffee paper and industrial cleaner. Constance came dressed for the role. Blazer pearls folder in hand. She gave an 8-minute speech about neighborhood integrity, rental saturation, housing stability. It was polished. She was good, I'll give her that. If you didn't know the paperwork, you might have believed every word. Then I got up. I laid down the title reports, showing my 14 properties had no HOA encumbrances. Shelby handed over the summary of the civil claims from the homeowners Constance had unlawfully billed. Dorothy Pratt stood up and read a letter explaining how Constance had quoted her in a newsletter without permission. Clifton talked about the dues he'd paid for nothing. The Spencers spoke about the shed they demolished because they were told they had to. Then old Gus Fenway, 78 years old, hearing aids in both ears, zero appetite for drama, walked up to the podium, gripped the sides of it, and said, "That street didn't need saving. It needed somebody to stop making everybody else's lives harder." Room went dead quiet. The council tabled Constance's petition, ordered further review, and just like that, the woman who'd stood on porches issuing commands with a clipboard was sitting in a folding chair, staring at her lap while the whole town understood exactly what she was. That wasn't the loud kind of victory. No shouting, no courtroom hammer, just silence and a gavel, and a woman realizing public confidence is a hard thing to put back together once the truth gets hold of it. After that, the unraveling was quick. The HOA's insurer settled the claims. Full refunds, damages paid. The shed compensated. Over $22,000 out the door. Constance resigned that August for personal reasons, which is a phrase people use when the actual reasons have attorneys attached to them. A new HOA president came in, hired real legal counsel, cleaned up the governing documents, and stopped pretending his authority extended past the paper. Phyllis kept her husband's boat until she was ready. Donated it the next spring to a youth fishing club. They sent her a thank you card, and she called me just to read it out loud. And me, I took those empty lots at the east end of the street and turned them into a little green space. Benches, native plants, open to everybody. No gatekeeping, no nonsense. I also set up a small scholarship fund for kids in the local trades program HVAC Plumbing Electrical, the kind of work that built my life. Because here's the thing, this whole mess taught me, and it took me a while to say this without sounding bitter, power doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it looks like a polo shirt, a fake smile, and a clipboard. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the loud monsters, they're the petty ones, the ones who get used to nobody checking them. And law, real law, is quieter than ego. It lives in records, signatures, titles, paper. Truth doesn't usually kick the door in. Most of the time it just waits for the right room. So yeah, watching Constance fall from her little throne felt good. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But what really stayed with me was this: I didn't beat her by being louder. I beat her by reading deeper, documenting better, and refusing to let somebody else define what was mine. Now, I want to ask you something. When somebody uses a little bit of authority to bully people and they finally get exposed, is that justice or is it karma catching up? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a boss, a neighbor, or anybody who thought rules only existed for other people, tell me your story. I really want to hear where you stand on it and whether you think people like Constance ever truly change once they've been caught.